Welcome to All Things Work, a podcast from SHRM. I'm your host, Anne Sparaco. Everybody can relate to this. Everybody wants to hear about growth and success within their organization, within their own career. That is something we can all relate to in this week's episode of All Things Work. And joining us today for this exact discussion is David Epstein, Director of Human Resources and Talent Strategy for Mobilization for Justice. Welcome, David, to All Things Work.
Thank you, Anne. Pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you. We're really excited to kind of really dive into this conversation. In an article with SHRM, you shared, your insights around performance improvement plans, or what people might know as called a PIP, for underperforming employees. And in this episode, we really want to focus on the other side of this, which is high performers, high performing employees, and how to support their growth of all stars in their organization. But before we jump and dive deep into that conversation, because we can go down so far into so many discussions surrounding this, I want to start off by, can you start by describing your role at Mobilization for Justice and the importance of performance management strategy for the success of organizations?
Well, my role is, as you mentioned, my title is Director of Human Resources and Talent Strategy. So I sit on the leadership team. And really from soup to nuts, I'm responsible for making sure that we have, our strategy and culture mission being carried out every single day in an overarching level. But underneath that umbrella, or everything from benefits and compensation to administering our collective bargaining agreement for our union staff, as well as talent management, and onboarding, as well as offboarding and employee experience and engagement.
And employee experience engagement is such a high priority in order to have a healthy workplace culture. That's something that SHRM, really believes in here. And, when we talk about those high performers, they don't come without certain challenges. So what are some of those unique challenges that high performers might face in the workplace?
I think one of the main challenges post-pandemic is identifying high performers in an environment that's either hybrid or remote, and ensuring that there's equity in terms of identifying those high performers. And specifically what I mean is that pre-COVID, there was more of an ability to interact with your manager and other people in the organization on a personal level. And you would have impromptu conversations at the copy machine, in the lunchroom. I think that has shifted in most organizations, where most organizations might be 2 or 3 days a week. And even if you're in the office, one of the things that I find, and probably many people in your audience do as well, is that you wind up being on Zoom or Teams anyway, because you might be in the office that day, but the other 3 people who are there for that meeting are not in the office. So it makes it more challenging to have those kind of like impromptu meetings and conversations where high performers can like interact or do presentations that kind of fit, their needs or the organization's needs. Some people are introverts and extroverts. Some people do better in person than online. So I think those are some of the challenges, and HR's role in ensuring that that there's a mentorship program, for example, interactions with leadership in multiple ways is extremely important, not just in terms of equity, but in terms of, ensuring that you keep your high potentials. So that's one of the first things I would mention. So in sort of setting the stage. And I think that one of the things that's really important for high potentials is making sure that you communicate that, these are the core competencies that are required for success within the organization, giving them the opportunity to meet those core competencies through education, and making sure that education is through many different avenues, such as e-learning, as well as in-person conferences and classes and things like that. And also instilling, in terms of the culture of the organization, that continuous learning is a core value of the organization, and leadership really leading by example. For example, I make sure that when the staff that support myself, that I emphasize to them that I go to conferences, that I participate in continuous learning, and I do online and in person. So you're really you're leading by example that no matter what your stage is in terms of your career, that continuous learning and growth is important. And, one of the things I like about Peter Drucker, who many in your audience will know, is, his famous quote about, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's a really important thing. Maybe something everyone wants to think about in terms of this context is that creating a culture of continuous growth and continuous learning is absolutely critical. And you can say all those things, but if you don't have some of the things that I mentioned in place and you're not living those every day, then people will get less engaged. And so your high potentials, you may not be able to identify them, or there may be people there who are extremely talented, but there's no opportunity for them to grow and shine within the organization.
I know we have a lot of high performers here at SHRM, and they hone their craft so much. I feel like I'm learning from them all the time. But there can be somewhat of a downside to that is, and I think a lot of people who are high performers can relate to this. The more work you do well, the more work you're given because you're trusted with that. And I think a lot of employers tend to do this, and it's something for managers to kind of watch out for, but issues like burnout and even imposter syndrome, where maybe they're taking on a new role and they don't actually think that they're worthy of this title because, like they said, they're kind of hard on themselves. They're high performers. They're going to be tough on their own work. They're going to be their own personal critic. I'm like that. I know a lot of people like that. I think a lot of people can relate to it too. So, how can HR leaders like identify these specific needs when it comes to issues like burnout and imposter syndrome of high performers to ensure they remain engaged and are successful? I know you touched on it a little bit, but I would love to gear it towards more of the burnout and imposter syndrome.
Sure, sure. This is very apropos,
Mhm.
especially post pandemic, where actually a SHRM research showed that it was like 1 in 3 identified as being burnt out.
Mhm.
There was a Gallup survey, 76% either were somewhat or completely burned out and exhausted in the workplace. So I think from an HR perspective, it's critical to educate managers who are supervising staff on uh, wellness, and
Right.
I think it's important for HR to educate managers on time management, um, and also to educate them on the signs of burnout. Um,
Mm.
and just the importance of wellness in the workplace in general. Um, as a certified wellness practitioner, I read a lot of articles on this in terms of being aware of warning signs of burnout. So I think that's really important, the education. And it's education of managers and staff. So staff also to be self-aware. And also
Right.
as an organization to provide tools like employee assistance programs um, to ensure that if you do need assistance, that the organization's in the position to help. The other thing I
Mhm.
would add is that there was this phenomenon called quiet hiring, in which some organizations had made decisions to take someone, let's say, like myself, a director of human resources, that's my area of expertise, and decide to assign me to be now responsible for public relations. So now I'm
Mhm.
director of both
Right.
without providing the proper training or adjustment to work in order to be able to do both jobs. So I think there can be discussion about whether that could be a growth opportunity if done correctly. But I
Mhm.
think where those things kind of go wrong is where, in order to either save money or to cover for someone who left and they're not sure what they want to do organizationally, is placing more responsibility on those who they feel can do the work. But it has this
Right.
this this is counterintuitive, and it has the reverse
Mhm.
effect in which the person is probably not going to receive that all too well to be placed in a position where they're doing work at a level where either they're not trained to do it or it's not an area that they want to do. So I think organizations have to be careful, in that example, but also even just in their area of expertise, assigning more and more work without having a sense of what the workload is. Because to your point, as far
Mhm.
as high performers, many who are type A, some also may have other aspects to their personality as well. that it's really important to realize that when you're in a position of authority and you assign somebody additional work, is to realize that they may not really feel comfortable saying no.
Exactly.
And so you really have to be conscious about getting feedback from your high performers and asking,
Mhm.
I have this growth opportunity. Is this something that you're interested in? And not be a gotcha question, really be a question
Right.
about this is an opportunity for growth. Would you be interested? I would
Mhm.
add to that that the another important thing is not to take that sense of volunteerism and someone who's really motivated to work for the organization for granted. And I would offer additional compensation or time off, uh,
Mhm.
to reward somebody. One of the things that I've done in the past is when someone takes on additional responsibility, is offer something called an honorarium or a differential, in which they specifically see that they're being paid an extra amount to do this work and to make
Okay.
very clear what this work is. And so that
Mhm.
there's, clarity from the beginning about what's expected. The worst case scenario, of course, you want to avoid is a high potential or high performer who has a really bad experience and winds up being burnt out or leave the organization.
Can you talk about some of the signs that employers and managers and HR professionals should be aware of and maybe look out for? Because they can be pretty subtle.
Sure, sure. I mean, for those who have a baseline already established,
Mhm.
managers should look for changes in those baselines. For example, if uh, there's a requirement for the job to be timely for being at meetings or for being in the office, and they've always been reliable about that. And you notice there's a pattern of missing work or calling in and not being able to come into the office.
Mhm.
If you notice and you see them in person and you see signs of distress, such as just fatigue, those are some of the things that you want to, look out for. Um,
Mhm.
Also making sure that before it gets to that point, because it's really difficult, um, to once someone is actually in burnout,
Mhm.
which technically isn't like it leads to other things like depression and anxiety.
Mhm. Yeah.
I always think to myself that the walls of the workplace are porous. So in addition to their jobs, they have the stress of their commute, of their family issues. Maybe they have
Mhm.
caregiving issues in terms of childcare and elder care, or both, or all sorts of
Right.
different things.
Mhm.
And so I always argue to be proactive, and that's when we go back to sort of training managers. Is training managers on these warning signs of if you notice a change, if you notice that something is not going as well in terms of their performance, all of a sudden they're not meeting deadlines. If they're
Mhm.
responsible for writing a legal brief and their work is not up to par, then it's time to start to have that conversation because it's not necessarily just going to be burnout from the work. It's from everything else in life that comes together. We spend most of our time, as we always say, at work, but now with, sometimes people are working from home and then they're coming into the office. There's so many different stressors that come together to create sort of this potential for burnout. And that's why I mentioned that Gallup survey where
Right.
76% of those who were polled, and even in the SHRM survey, it was about a third had or are experiencing symptoms of burnout.
Right.
So it's really an epidemic.
I think that's why it's so important to bring up mental health, and that's why I love all things work is because we can bring up these discussions and help create this awareness so that if your coworker is going through something, you can recognize those signs as well. And I think a lot of people can really, really relate to this. And from your perspective, you know, we talked about integrity in a role. We talked about that awareness in the role, and managers actually struggle as well. It's not just high performing employees, but the managers are employees as well. And I think that's important to remember here. And you talked about SHRM mental health research. We released research in spring, I remember, and it discussed how managers are actually they're prioritizing their company's well-being over their own personal well-being, because there's that pressure to keep that high performing status. What are your just thoughts on that, the fact that, with the manager perspective?
Yes, this is a huge problem, isn't it? Because um, most employees and managers, statistically, don't use their PTO time, and in the long run, it's not healthy for them or the organization. I think that managers should lead by example in this area. So, for example, they should take their PTO time. They should also make sure that if they're sick, they take their sick time. Also, ensure that if their staff is not taking their vacation time, to give them a gentle nudge to say, look, I really appreciate all your efforts for the organization and the team, but I also need you to be refreshed. So I need you to take that 1 or 2 weeks off to come back all refreshed with all these new ideas and really make it exciting that like, instead of like this fearful thing where people are afraid if I'm going to, go out for 2 weeks, they're going to find someone else for my job. It's a real reality that people think that. I understand it, but I think we as HR leaders really need to ensure that when we're, as part of our education of supervisors, is that we remind them that they need to lead by example in this area and also to reassure their staff that it's okay to take care of your own needs. To your point about, of course, managers and anyone in leadership or employees too, and they have the same issues. I would say that all of this is really not one size fits all. I would just encourage our audience to think about what their workplace is like and what the needs of their staff are like, and kind of tailor it as much as you can to what they're looking for. Not every organization is the same. It's why I really value doing employee feedback surveys and doing focus groups and all other mechanisms that work for that organization in terms of getting that feedback. Like, what does it look like for you in terms of, do you like to take long weekends? Do you like to take 2 weeks off? Or what type of, do our benefits provide enough mental health care services that, and a lot of this has to be done anonymously in terms of people feeling able to get that feedback. But I think again, it's important to, you look at your staff, you look at your leadership, you make sure that you have this sort of tailored approach to ensuring that woven into the culture is this culture of well-being and this culture of wellness that really encourages people to take care of themselves. Because long term, it's going to reduce your healthcare costs as an organization. You're going to have a happier workplace and a much more engaged workplace. And we all know that if we keep 5 more of our high performers an extra 3 years, how valuable that is in terms of productivity and in terms of dollars. One of the struggles always with HR is that, when we sit at the C-suite table, a lot of the questions we
Mhm.
get is, well, does this make sense to invest $40,000 in wellness? Um,
Right.
and we can come back and say, well, statistics show that if we keep 5 more people, we can show you how much we have saved in terms of productivity and hiring costs by
Mhm.
implementing proactively these things. The emphasis
Right.
really is to proactively do this so you don't get to the point where all of a sudden you're surprised that your top people are all leaving.
Right. Exactly. And kind of just going back to that word integrity. It's not just, your daily tasks and getting, the best results out of your work. It's really, from that higher up position, you know, with your integrity, how are you going to display that? How are you going to show that you have, faith in your coworkers? You want them to perform well, so you have to support them, and you're going to do that, because you're seeing that overall goal, and you're seeing what's really going to benefit people is going to benefit the organization overall. It's about balancing that budget,
Absolutely.
Awesome. That's awesome. And so you touched on company culture and the importance of that promoting employee well-being and engagement. We love to hear that. And we know there are some ways HR leaders can cultivate an environment to support that continuous growth and development for those high performers and other employees as well. But what are some of those ways that HR pros can really step in there?
I think I think one of the most important things um, is to establish this baseline where I like to think of Jack Welch's, famous from GE, when he
Mhm.
said that an employer can't guarantee lifetime employment, but they can help with lifetime employability. So
Okay.
what I like about that is that it sort of sets the stage for um, creating a work culture in which there will be multiple opportunities to develop yourself. And it may not necessarily be along the vertical. Maybe there's not an opportunity for 3 years to develop in terms of getting a manager or director title, but you'll have
Mhm.
opportunities on the horizontal to develop yourself through, growth and development. And I think one of the top things that I would have on my list to encourage, high potential employees is giving them opportunities, what I call stretch opportunities. So if there are opportunities to step into additional responsibilities to help them grow and uh, engage in continuous learning opportunities, conferences,
Mhm.
e-learning, other whatever educational opportunities are needed to be able to do that job well is to provide that to them. And I think that in addition to that, mentorship is really important. So, earlier we talked with your audience about, the importance of keeping in mind that there's this hybrid, this a new workplace that we're all trying to, as
Mhm.
HR pros, kind
Mhm.
of navigate this
Right.
new normal. And one of the things is just to make sure that there's opportunities for if you have, fully remote staff, making sure that they have opportunities and making sure that hybrid staff have opportunities, and those who are in person may have more opportunities, but to try to balance that out so that there's equity across the organization as much as possible. And then I would also look at in organizations the availability of e-learning and utilizing your intranet in
Mhm.
order to create competencies that people need to be able to grow in the organization and
Right.
ensure that everyone has access to learn those competencies, then
Mhm.
connect that to performance management and really give constructive feedback on how they're doing.
Mhm.
And then finally, allowing for flexibility. Everyone has a different path. And I think if we as HR pros can recognize that how wonderful it is that we have such a diverse workforce within our organizations is that we should be open to that and provide as much flexibility as we can.
I love that when it comes to especially the, just trying to find new avenues for people to grow, because like we said, we started off with this kind of conversation was that the high performers, they're not just looking to sit still. They're high performers. It's kind of just in their nature. They're gonna want to do something either different or kind of take on more responsibility in a new role. And I think that's just so important to keep that conversation open, keeping those opportunities open for them. And I think that's a big key in making them feel like they feel welcomed and they want to stay and they see potential in the future. I think that's a huge part of this discussion. And we know that anybody who's hiring or in recruitment would love to hire and bring in high performers, from the beginning. So what do you know of any unique recruitment strategies that you would recommend for HR pros when it comes to attracting those high performers to their organization?
Well, I think it's important with that question in mind to consider that most people will, when they're looking for a position, are only going to spend a few minutes when they're kind of scrolling through those advertisements or when they get the email. So I think it's important that very quickly within in terms of your whether it's your social media or your job advertising, whatever that might be, is to ensure that very quickly you have a statement that's digestible about the culture of the organization. So if you're an organization that's innovative and you want to attract people who are innovative, you want to have something that's very concise and attractive to those who want to work for an organization like that. Similarly, if you're working in a nonprofit where there's a social mission that's really attractive, you want to make sure that you're looking for mission driven people and you want to make sure that that is readily available. And if you can get the person interested at that point and they go to your website it's really important to have your commitment to your social mission, or if an organization wants to stress employee testimonials about their experience, those can be very, very helpful. And I really also like the programs where you can uh, uh, be awarded a something that's, best place to work for. There's a bunch of them that are out there.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
not only is that really nice for people to see who want to get a quick snapshot of what your priorities as an organization are, but also internally, it's a great opportunity to get people working towards that. So I think those are some things that I would look at, but also um, employee referrals, which you have to be cautious and balance employee
Right.
referrals, because you don't want it to impact the diversity recruitment in your organization. At the
Mhm.
same time, if you've identified employees who have the core competencies to be high performers, it's a great
Mhm.
way to kind of, if you have positions that are open, is to interact with them and ask, is anybody in your circle who would be interested in working with us?
Wow. That was such insightful answers on this episode. I have so many more questions, but we only have so much time. So thank you so much, David, for your time today and your insight and your expertise. We really, really appreciated it for this week's episode.
My pleasure, Nan. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of All Things Work. Before we say goodbye, I encourage you to subscribe to All Things Work wherever you enjoy your podcasts. And if you ever want to see more around this, we and other hot button topics impacting the world of work, we curate content each week in a newsletter that includes the podcast plus related research and helpful resources to keep you in the know on all these amazing discussions. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please go on to the SHRM website. That's shrm.org/all things work. And we'd also love to hear from you. If you want to leave a comment, or just share your thoughts. We want you to be part of this conversation. That's it for us on All Things Work, and we'll see you next time.